So if you're looking at this segment right now, I've assumed that you're planning on trying to keep the house. So we've gone through that analysis, and at this point you say, you know, at least I have a thought that I want to keep the house. All right. So nowadays, one of the best ways to do that and to fix the mortgage problem is to work out a modification. And you've probably heard that. Some people call it remodification, but it's really not. It's a modification of the terms of the mortgage. And what we're trying to do is get it to a payment that you can afford, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and also rolling back the arrearages so you don't have to pay those back. A lot of times I come in and people with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in arrears on the mortgages, they're not going to pay that back. And that's a problem. So if you had to pay that back along with the payments, you just can't do it. So that's where the modification is going to come in to help you. Now, another possibility, although it's still rare, is to actually eliminate that completely and get rid of what we call a principal reduction. We'll talk about that as well. So on this segment of modules, we're going to talk about the modification process, and there's many different types of modification. Now, and let me just talk about this in general. The very first one that you're probably most familiar with is what we call HAMP. It's the Home Affordable Modification Program that was put in place to kind of give the governmental prod to mortgage companies to do modifications because they just weren't doing it, and we had this crisis. So it gives them a number of incentives. It sets up regulations and guidelines for doing modifications. And we're going to spend some time talking about HAMP, but that's the very first one that most people are familiar with. I'll tell you though, most modifications are not done using the HAMP program, as much press as it gets. Most are done doing what's called an in-house proprietary program that each of the different lenders offer. And each of them are a little slightly different. We're going to talk about the different guidelines and how those works. But we generally focus first on the HAMP guidelines and getting you through. And if you kind of sort of make those, and if you don't make those, then we'll look at the proprietary modification programs, which most of them will do. In addition to that, FHA has their own sort of set of guidelines for modification programs, and those can be a bit tricky. And so we're going to talk about that in a separate module as well. So the very first thing you need to really look at is what type of mortgage do you have? And that's going to be an issue at some point too. Who's the servicer? Who's the investor? Which we'll need to find out because sometimes that's an issue. And is it FHA or VA, or what type of loan is it? Now we've already kind of gone through that in some of the other modules, and I'm going to refer you back to reviewing the complaint or reviewing your mortgages to figure out what type of mortgage you have, because that's important as we go forward. So once you figure out what you got, then let's come back and we'll look at each of the different segments.